Helena James was not like other billionaires. She didn't grow up with money or private jets. She had built her company from nothing, brick by brick, but success came with pressure, expectations, and enemies. That night, she had just left a high-class gala where her board members questioned her leadership again. They said she was too young, too bold, too emotional. She needed air, time to think, space to breathe. So she told her driver to wait and started walking alone down the city streets. The night was cold and the air smelled of rain. Her heels clicked on the empty sidewalk as she moved past closed shops and flickering street lamps. She should have taken the main road. But her thoughts were heavy and her feet wandered into a quieter alley. It was dark there, no lights. No traffic, no people, at least that's what she thought. As she stepped deeper into the alley, she heard whispers, then footsteps, then silence. Before she could turn around, 4 men stepped out from behind a dumpster. They wore black hoodies, masks covering their faces, and their eyes gleamed with bad intent. "Nice purse," one of them said, slowly moving closer. Helena froze, unsure of what to do. She wasn't weak. She had taken self-defense classes, but this was different. She was outnumbered, cornered, and alone. One man reached for her necklace. Another grabbed her handbag. She tried to scream, but one of them covered her mouth. Tears filled her eyes as fear took over. Her mind screamed for help, but her body wouldn't move. Just when she thought this was it, a voice came from the shadows. "Let her go." The words were simple, calm, and dangerous. The attackers turned their heads and saw a tall figure walking toward them. He wore a worn leather jacket and carried nothing but a plastic grocery bag. At first they laughed. "Who the hell are you, old man?" One of them barked. The man didn't answer. He dropped the grocery bag gently on the ground and stepped closer. "Walk away," he said again, voice like stone this time. There was something in his tone that made even the thugs hesitate. One of the thugs pulled out a knife, thinking he could scare the stranger. He lunged forward, but in less than a second, the man twisted his wrist, knocked the blade away, and slammed the thug into the wall. Another tried to swing at him, but the stranger ducked, grabbed his arm, and flipped him over with shocking ease. The last 2 didn't wait. They ran, disappearing into the night without looking back. Helena stood there, shaking, eyes wide. The man turned to her and slowly picked up her purse and necklace from the ground. He didn't speak as he handed them back. Thank you," she whispered, still trying to understand what just happened. He gave a small nod, then turned to walk away. "Wait," she called, her voice still trembling. "Who are you?" But he didn't answer. He disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he came. Helena stood there alone in the alley, holding her purse like it was made of glass. Her heart still pounded in her chest, but her fear was slowly turning into something else, curiosity. Who was that man? Why was he there? How did he fight like that? And most of all, why did he look so calm? She had seen bodyguards, ex-Marines, security teams, but this man, he moved like a ghost trained in silence. Helena made her way back to her driver, still in shock. She didn't say a word during the ride home, but her mind was racing. The alley, the voice, the movements, the silence. Everything played in her head over and over like a movie scene. She wanted answers, not because of fear, but because of something deeper. Something in her gut told her that this man was more than a random hero. She reached her penthouse apartment, looked out over the city skyline, and made a decision. Tomorrow, she would find him, whoever he was. She needed to know the truth, not just because he saved her life, but because something about that moment, something about him, changed everything inside her. The girl who once feared nothing now couldn't stop thinking about a stranger in the dark. And that meant only one thing: this was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of a story that would change both of their lives forever. Helena James didn't sleep that night. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling as the memory of the alley replayed again and again. Not the fear, not the darkness, but him. The way he moved, the silence in his eyes, the speed of his hands. He was no ordinary man. He wasn't a cop, he wasn't a thief, he wasn't afraid. He was trained, calm, and dangerous in a way she had never seen before. The next morning, Helena sat in her office on the 40th floor of her company's glass tower. But her thoughts weren't on business meetings or quarterly reports. They were stuck on a man with no name. She opened her laptop and pulled up traffic camera footage from the alley. Her company had contracts with city surveillance systems, so access wasn't a problem. She rewound the footage again and again until she found the moment. There, in grainy black and white, was her mysterious savior stepping out of the shadows. Using facial recognition software, she ran a search. It took hours. But she finally found a match. Daniel Carter, age 38, resident of Brooklyn, no known criminal record, no social media, no listed job except part-time janitor at a local diner. But there was something strange. His military records were sealed, classified, marked with red flags and black bars. She couldn't see much, only that he had served, and that his file was connected to a project labeled Eco Gray. The rest was locked behind military clearance levels she didn't have access to. Even as a billionaire, Helena leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping on the desk. Why would a former soldier be working as a janitor? Why would someone like him hide from the world? And why did he risk his life for her? The questions wouldn't leave her alone, so she did something bold. Something Helena was famous for. She acted. She sent her driver to the Brooklyn address listed in his records and followed in a second car. Unannounced, Daniel Carter's apartment building was old. Small and quiet, Helena stepped out of her luxury car wearing jeans and a jacket, trying not to draw attention. She climbed 3 flights of stairs and stood in front of a pale green door with peeling paint. She took a deep breath, knocked twice, and waited. The door opened slowly. And there he was. Daniel stood in the doorway wearing a plain gray t-shirt, his eyes surprised but cautious. He looked at her, then at the hallway, then back at her again. "You shouldn't be here," he said simply. "I know," she replied. "But I needed to say thank you, properly." Daniel didn't smile, but he stepped aside and nodded. 5 minutes, he said. She walked into a small apartment, clean, neat, and filled with books, photos, and a tiny plant on the window. There were toys in the corner, a little pink unicorn and some coloring books. "You have a daughter," Helena said. Looking around, "Yes," Daniel answered, his tone still flat. "Lily, 7 years old. She's at school right now." Helena sat down on the old sofa, unsure what to say next. "I did some digging," she finally said. "I know you used to be in the army." "Maybe something more." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't speak. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she continued. I want to understand why you helped me." Daniel walked over to the window and stared out for a long moment. Then he spoke, slowly, carefully. "I've seen people get hurt before," he said, "and I've stayed quiet too many times. But that night, I couldn't just watch. You were outnumbered, helpless, and they didn't care who you were." Helena listened closely, her heart quiet. "Why are you hiding?" she asked softly. He turned and looked at her with tired eyes. "I'm not hiding," he said. "I'm protecting someone, my daughter. The world I left behind, it doesn't forget people like me. They turned me into something, then tossed me aside when I became inconvenient." He walked over and picked up a photo of a smiling girl with curly hair and bright eyes. "This is all that matters now," he said, his voice breaking just a little. Helena stood up and looked him in the eye. "I can help you," she said gently. He shook his head. "I don't need help," he replied. "I need peace." There was silence between them for a moment. Then Helena took out a small card from her pocket and placed it on the table. "My personal number," she said. "If you ever change your mind." Daniel didn't take the card, but he didn't throw it away either. She gave him a faint smile and walked toward the door. But before she left, she turned and asked, "Daniel, do you regret saving me?" He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "No, not for a second." Helena nodded, then left, her heart heavier than when she arrived. She had met men who wore masks of power and strength. But this man, this quiet janitor, had no mask. No lies, no greed, only truth, pain, and something she didn't expect, honor. As she sat back in her car and drove away, Helena realized something. This wasn't just a thank you visit. This was the beginning of a connection, and somewhere deep inside, she knew they hadn't seen the last of each other. Because fate had already tied their lives together, and what started as a rescue in a dark alley was far from over. Helena Jane sat alone in her high-rise office with the city skyline stretching wide behind her. Outside, the world moved fast. Taxis honking, screens flashing, buildings rising, but inside her heart, everything had slowed. She couldn't stop thinking about him. The stranger in the alley, the fighter in the shadows, the man who saved her and walked away without asking for anything. She had met politicians, world leaders, and billionaires. None of them moved her like this man did, not because he was mysterious, but because he was real. There was something about his silence that spoke louder than any speech she'd ever heard, and she couldn't ignore it. She wouldn't ignore it that morning. She called her most trusted private investigator, a quiet man named Foster who never asked questions. She gave him a name, Daniel Carter, and a single photo from the traffic cam footage. "I need everything," she said simply. Foster nodded once and disappeared like smoke. He returned just 2 days later, quiet as ever, holding a brown folder thicker than a phone book. "This man," he said, "he's not who he seems." Helena opened the file slowly, line by line. Daniel Carter, 38 years old, former military, discharged under sealed orders, no criminal record, one daughter, Lily Carter. He lived in Brooklyn, worked nights cleaning the floors at diners and gas stations. The file had pictures, him walking Lily to school, shopping for groceries, reading at the library. He lived simply, quietly, invisibly, but deeper in the folder were the shadows. Blacklisted records, mentions of missions that never existed, a unit that was wiped from official files. Words like Echo Gray and Operation Pale Tide showed up on pages full of redacted lines. One photo caught her eye, Daniel in full tactical gear, holding a wounded soldier on his back during a desert mission. The caption simply read, "Carter, hero." Helena closed the folder and sat back in her chair. Overwhelmed, this man wasn't a ghost. He was a fallen angel walking in plain sight. And the world had let him disappear. She felt something rise inside her. Guilt, anger, respect. She had power, influence, and reach. If she couldn't use it for someone like him, then what was the point of being rich? She made a decision. She would find him. Not to hire him, not to repay him, but to understand him, and maybe, just maybe, help him in return. Helena took her personal car this time. No assistants, no bodyguards, no cameras. She drove through the crowded streets until she reached a quiet block in Brooklyn where the buildings were old, but still standing strong. She stepped out, took a breath, and walked toward the same pale green door she'd visited before. She didn't knock this time. She waited until school ended and watched from across the street. At exactly 2:45 p.m., Daniel appeared, holding the hand of a small girl with a pink backpack. Lily was laughing about something, her ponytail bouncing with each step. Daniel carried a paper bag of groceries, his face calm, focused. Helena followed from a distance, careful not to be seen. She watched them walk into a small park nearby. Lily ran to the swings while Daniel sat on the bench like a statue. Always watching, Helena walked slowly toward him, unsure how he'd react. He looked up before she even said a word. "I know you're there," he said quietly. She stopped beside the bench and looked at Lily swinging high into the air. "She's beautiful." Helena said, "She's my whole world," he replied. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the breeze and the creaking of the swing chains. "You've been following me," Daniel finally said. "I had to," Helena admitted. "I needed to understand who you are." Daniel turned to her, his eyes calm but tired. "And now that you do?" "I want to help," she said. "Not out of guilt or debt, but because I believe you've been forgotten by the very system you gave your life to." Daniel didn't speak right away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a group of soldiers, smiling, sweaty, proud, standing in the desert with dust on their boots. "One by one, they disappeared," he said. "Not from bullets, but from silence, betrayal, politics. We were a project," he continued, "built for precision. Used for missions no one wanted to admit, then erased. I got out when I refused to kill a civilian target. They framed me for disobedience. Stripped my rank and dumped me. Helena looked at the photo, then at his face. And now you mop floors, she whispered. Daniel gave a small smile, not bitter, just real. I mop floors, he said. I cook breakfast. I read bedtime stories. I take Lily to school. I may not have medals anymore, but I've got peace. Helena felt her throat tighten. This man didn't want fame or recognition. He wanted to raise his daughter in a world where no one came knocking in the night. But something told her someone would come knocking. Men like Daniel Carter weren't just forgotten. They were feared by the wrong people. And if she had found him, others could too. Let me help you, she said again, this time firmer. Daniel looked at her long and hard. I don't want to owe anyone, he said. You don't, Helena replied, but I think the world owes you. You saved me, Daniel, and I don't forget people who saved my life. Lily came running toward them with a wide smile. Holding a tiny flower in her hand, she looked at Helena and asked sweetly, Are you my daddy's friend? Helena bent down and took the flower, her eyes wet. Yes, she said softly. Yes, I am. Daniel said nothing, but he didn't stop her. That, for Helena, was a beginning. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew this story wasn't over. Not for her, not for him, and certainly not for the little girl who brought light into both their lives. What started as a rescue in a dark alley was becoming something else. Something deeper, stronger, unbreakable. Daniel Carter had always lived life like a quiet storm, strong on the inside, still on the outside. After years in the military, after being betrayed by the system he once swore to serve, he had learned one rule: don't trust anyone with your peace. But something was different now. Helena James had found her way into his world. And whether he liked it or not, she was staying. He tried to keep his routine simple. Wake up at 5, make Lily's breakfast, walk her to school, mop floors at 2 different diners. Come home by 6, make dinner, help Lily with her spelling, read her a story, sleep, repeat. There was safety in repetition. It kept his mind from wandering back to sandstorms and secret missions, back to men who never came home. But ever since Helena had entered their lives, even Daniel could feel the shift. She didn't push too hard, didn't ask too much. Somehow she knew how to respect his walls without backing away from them. And Lily, oh, Lily adored her. Every time Helena visited, the little girl would grab her hand and show her drawings. New books, her pink sneakers, her superhero dad, one cold Thursday evening. Daniel found a package outside his door. It was wrapped neatly, no name, no note, just tape and silence. He took it inside and opened it carefully with his pocket knife. Inside were documents, not just any. These were classified briefings, old photographs, and a black envelope stamped with the same insignia Daniel thought he'd never see again, the Echo Gray unit crest. He sat at the table, staring, not blinking. They had found him. They knew where he lived. Not just him, Lily. His heart thudded heavy inside his chest like a drum in the dark, not because he was scared, but because he was ready, and he hadn't wanted to be. Helena showed up that night. Uninvited, but not unwelcome. She carried 2 paper bags, one with hot dinner, the other with sketchbooks and crayons for Lily. Daniel didn't say a word when she entered. He just handed her the black envelope and walked away to make tea. She opened it slowly and saw a photo of Daniel in a desert uniform, kneeling next to a destroyed convoy, blood on his hands, and a line written across the top. Carter knows what he did. Remind him we never forget. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page. Coordinates. Old mission files, satellite images. It wasn't just a warning. It was a message. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to pull him back in, or destroy everything he'd built if he refused. They've been watching, Helena whispered. Daniel nodded, still calm. They never stopped, he said. They just waited for the right time. Lily came skipping into the room, her little hands covered in marker ink. Can I draw Helena a dragon? She asked sweetly. Daniel smiled at her like nothing was wrong. Of course you can, he said. Make it strong and brave. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel and Helena sat outside on the small fire escape. The city buzzed below them, unaware of the war creeping back into this tiny apartment. You could run, Helena said quietly. Change your name, disappear again. Daniel shook his head. No more running, he said. If I keep running, I teach Lily to live in fear. I won't let that happen. Helena looked at him, her voice firmer this time. Then let me help. I have security contacts, private investigators, media reach, tech experts. You protected me in a dark alley, she said. Now I want to protect you in the light. Daniel didn't answer for a long time. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he wasn't used to. Not pity, not sympathy, but partnership. She wasn't doing this out of guilt or kindness. She saw his life as worth saving, not just surviving. That was new for him. And terrifying. If anything happens to Lily, he began. But Helena interrupted him softly. Nothing will, she said, because now she has two people watching over her. By the weekend, Helena had transformed her guest house into a secured, safe space. Discreet security cameras, encrypted Wi-Fi, panic buttons in every room. Daniel moved Lily there temporarily, saying it was a fun vacation. Lily didn't question it. She was too busy swimming in the heated pool and drawing dragons with Helena in the sunroom. Daniel, meanwhile, began preparing not for a fight, but for a plan. He contacted someone he hadn't spoken to in years, a hacker known only as Royce. They once served together. Then went underground after being burned by the same people. Royce agreed to meet. Curious why the ghost of Echo Gray was calling after all this time. They met in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath the city. The air smelled of rust and oil, but the energy between them was sharp. Daniel handed Royce the files, the message, the coordinates. I need eyes on everyone connected to this, he said. Every name, every payment, every step, Royce smirked, tapping away at a small keyboard connected to a glowing screen. You still owe me a bourbon, soldier, he said. Daniel nodded once. You'll get two. Back at the safe house, Helena watched Lily sleeping on the couch. The little girl held a dragon, drawing in one hand, and a toy soldier in the other. Helena gently tucked a blanket around her, then stood at the window, thinking, this wasn't just a story about secrets anymore. This was becoming war, and she was now part of it. She had no combat training, no classified past, no hidden weapons. But she had something else, power, reach, and a reason to fight. She wasn't just a CEO anymore, she was Daniel's ally. And whether he admitted it or not, he needed one. Daniel returned that night just before dawn. Helena met him at the door, no words needed. He handed her a small flash drive. This, he said. This will open everything, names, locations, deals. If they want a war, we'll show them we still remember how to win one. And in that moment, standing in the quiet of the safe house with a sleeping child in the next room, a billionaire and a forgotten soldier sealed a silent pact. Not just to survive, but to fight back together. Daniel Carter had fought in deserts, jungles and alleys, but now, for the first time, the war was knocking at his front door wearing a suit and a smile. It didn't come with bullets, it came with shadows, with silence, pressure, power, and money. And it didn't just want to hurt him, it wanted to erase him. Again, it started with small things. Helena's assistant was locked out of her email for 48 hours without reason. Then the server logs at her tech lab were wiped clean overnight. At first, her team called it a glitch. But Helena knew better. Then came the investors suddenly. 3 major partners pulled out of upcoming projects, giving vague excuses about security concerns. The stock dipped quietly. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to raise eyebrows. And then the board, her own board, started to whisper. Helena sat in her penthouse one evening with a glass of untouched tea. Daniel stood at the window watching the traffic far below. You said this would happen? She said quietly. Daniel nodded. They don't attack like they used to, he replied. They don't need guns when they have fear, Royce. The hacker had uncovered part of the puzzle. The men behind the envelope weren't just ex-military, they were part of something deeper. A private contractor network funded by old war money, tech firms, and political friends. They had ties to overseas black ops, surveillance systems, even media agencies. And now they wanted to rebuild Echo Gray without anyone who could expose them. Daniel was a threat to their silence. Helena was guilty by association. Daniel knew what they wanted, to isolate him, trap him, and remove him without a sound. So he changed the rules, he stepped out of the shadows. It started with a quiet appearance. He went with Helena to a charity event, dressed in a plain black suit, standing silently behind her. People stared, whispered, wondered. Some recognized his face from old grainy photos, but no one dared to ask who he was. Until one journalist did, a young woman named Myra, who had a nose for danger and a heart for justice. She approached Helena during a coffee break. "I know who he is," she whispered, "or at least—" Who he was, Helena looked at her carefully. "If you know that, then you know why we're being watched," she said. Myra nodded slowly. "Tell your story," she said. "Let me help you put it out there before they rewrite it." Daniel didn't like it. He didn't like being seen, heard, or questioned. But he also knew the truth. Sometimes, the only way to stop a shadow is to shine a light directly into it. A week later, the story went live, front page of an independent digital outlet. Headline: "Forgotten Hero, the man the military tried to erase." It was bold, raw, and real. Daniel's name, his missions, his fall, all laid out with photos, documents, and interviews. It didn't tell everything, but it told enough. And it sent a message that same night. Daniel received a message of his own, an envelope, slipped under the door. Inside was a single photo, Lily at her school playground, and a note written in sharp red ink: "Silence has a price. And so does noise." Daniel's fingers crushed the photo in his hand, not from fear, from rage. Helena walked in and saw the look in his eyes. "What happened?" she asked, her voice calm but shaking. "They're watching Lily," he said. Helena grabbed her phone and immediately contacted her private security chief. "I want her moved," she said, "now, within an hour." Lily was escorted to a remote family cabin in Vermont with trained guards and Helena's most trusted staff. Daniel kissed her forehead and promised he'd join her soon. Lily, brave as ever, just smiled and said, "Go stop the bad guys, Dad," back in the city. The pressure increased. Helena's accounts were flagged by federal banks for audit. Her credit lines paused. Her face splashed across social media as involved with a military fugitive, but the article had done something unexpected. It rallied people. Veterans groups, activists, and thousands of strangers flooded comment sections and news feeds with support. "Bring Daniel Carter back," expose Eco Gray. "Heroes deserve truth." The enemy wasn't prepared for the people to care. They preferred silence, apathy, forgetting, but now the noise was getting louder. Daniel, Helena, and Royce formed a plan, not just defense, offense. Royce traced the signal that had been used to watch Lily. It led to an abandoned warehouse in Jersey, the same site where Daniel's last mission had gone wrong years ago. It wasn't just symbolic, it was bait. Daniel knew it was a trap, but sometimes walking into a trap was the only way to spring it. He suited up, black boots, gloves, a vest with light armor. He wasn't the man he used to be, but he was still a weapon when it mattered. Helena handed him a tiny earpiece. "I'm staying in your ear," she said. "You don't do this alone." Daniel gave her a slight nod, not agreement. But respect. That night, he entered the warehouse with no backup but a flashlight and a name. The name of the man who betrayed him long ago, Derek Voss. Inside the warehouse were echoes, broken crates, shadows on metal walls. Then a voice: "You should have stayed dead." "Carter," Derek Voss stepped out. Older, heavier, but still sharp, flanked by 2 armed guards. He smiled like a man who never faced consequences. Daniel didn't blink. "Too bad for you," he said. "I learned to survive instead." And in that moment, it began not just a fight, but a reckoning. For Daniel, for Helena, and for every silent soldier who had been erased for convenience. Daniel Carter stood in the middle of the cold warehouse. Dust floating through the flashlight beam like tiny ghosts. Old crates and rusted steel surrounded him like forgotten tombs. In front of him stood Derek Voss, the man who once called Daniel his brother. His comrade, his friend. Now he was the reason Daniel had been erased. And the reason his daughter was in danger. "You've aged," Derek said with a crooked grin. "You still talk too much," Daniel replied without blinking. Derek's guards tightened their grip on their rifles. But Daniel didn't flinch. He wasn't here to play games. He was here to end them in his ear. Helena's voice crackled softly. Cameras live, audio clean. We're watching, across the city. In a quiet tech room inside Helena's building, Royce sat surrounded by monitors. He was streaming the warehouse feed to 3 media outlets, 2 watchdog agencies, and 1 veteran whistleblower group. If anything happened to Daniel tonight, the world would see it, and that was the point. Derek walked in circles. You always thought you were the moral one, he said. You disobeyed a kill order in the desert, let a target escape, and look where it got you. Discharged. Blacklisted, forgotten. Daniel stared straight at him. That target was a medic treating wounded civilians, he said. Following orders isn't loyalty. Derek, it's cowardice when you know it's wrong, Derek laughed. Low and cruel. You still think truth wins, he said. This isn't about truth. This is about control. And you lost that a long time ago? Daniel stepped forward slowly. I didn't come here to argue, he said. I came to expose you. At that exact moment, Royce hit a key. Screens all across the city lit up, anonymous live feeds showing Derek's face, his voice, his confession. The entire conversation was being streamed in real time to media, law firms, and Daniel's former unit members still alive and watching from around the world. Derek's smile faded. He looked at the ceiling camera, then at Daniel. You think this will bring you back? He growled. I don't want to come back, Daniel said calmly. I want to burn the lie you built. Suddenly, one of the guards raised his weapon, but Daniel was faster. In one smooth motion, he disarmed the man, slammed his shoulder into the wall, and flipped him to the ground. The second guard froze, not out of fear, but out of calculation. He dropped his weapon and stepped back slowly. Daniel never took his eyes off Derek. Outside, police sirens howled in the distance. Helena's legal team had sent the full digital packet to federal agents 10 minutes ago. Now, they were coming for Derek Voss not just as a corrupt ex-commander, but as a national threat with decades of hidden crimes finally in the light. Derek lunged toward a steel drawer nearby. Daniel tackled him before he could reach the pistol inside. They crashed to the ground, fists flying, knees slamming. Dust rising around them. It wasn't a clean fight, but it was real, brutal, honest, raw, 2 paths colliding. 2 paths diverging, one man fighting for power, the other for peace in the end. Daniel pinned him down with a bruised elbow to the throat. You forgot something, he said, breathing hard. I never stopped being a soldier. I just became a father too. Police lights bathed the warehouse in red and blue. Doors burst open, agents swarmed in, guns raised, orders shouted. Daniel stepped back with his hands raised. Calm and slow, Derek was cuffed on the floor, spitting curses into the dusty air, but his voice no longer mattered, because the world had heard everything. Hours later, Daniel sat in a quiet room beside Helena. She handed him an ice pack and a soft towel for the blood on his cheek. He took it, barely wincing. You streamed it perfectly, he said. Helena nodded, her eyes tired but proud. Royce got it to over 100 channels before anyone could shut it down. By tomorrow, the world will know the truth. Daniel leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Then it's finally over, he whispered. Helena placed a hand on his arm. No, she said gently. It's finally beginning the next morning. Headlines flooded every corner of the internet. Black Ops commander arrested in massive cover-up scandal. Forgotten soldier turned whistleblower exposes military secrets. CEO teams up with ex-veteran to fight corruption. People didn't just read the news. They responded. Veterans sent messages of support. Mothers of fallen soldiers shared stories of silence finally being broken. Helena's reputation rebounded, stronger than ever, and Daniel? He was no longer a ghost. He was a symbol, not of war, but of justice. Of standing up when it matters most, of protecting what you love. No matter what it costs, that night, Daniel video called Lily, who was still safe in the Vermont cabin. Her face lit up when she saw him. Daddy, are the bad guys gone? He smiled softly, bruised and tired, but finally at peace. Yes, baby, he said. They're gone. Can I come home now? She asked. Daniel paused, looking at Helena across the room. Soon, he said. But we're building something better for you first. And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter believed it, not just that he had survived, but that he had won, not just the battle, but his name back, his purpose, and maybe, just maybe, a future he never thought he deserved. Asterisk the morning after the warehouse takedown. The world woke up to a new name trending across every platform. Daniel Carter. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a symbol of resistance, of truth, of sacrifice. People from across the country, even from other nations, began to speak his name with respect. The forgotten warrior had become the face of what the system tried to bury. Helena James stood at her office window with the newspaper in her hand. Daniel's face stared back at her, black suit, steady eyes. A quiet storm in a photo that needed no caption. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Media interviews, offers, documentary requests. Brand endorsements, all wanting a piece of the story, but Daniel wasn't interested in fame. He only wanted one thing, peace for his daughter and safety for their future. That afternoon, Helena met Daniel in the private garden of her estate. He wore a simple black shirt and jeans. A bandage still across his cheek, Lily sat on the grass nearby, drawing a picture of a dragon standing in front of a giant building. Is that the bad guy's castle? Helena asked her. No, Lily giggled. It's Dad protecting your company. Daniel smiled quietly. But there was something deeper in his eyes, a weariness. Not from the battle, but from years of being unheard. I didn't expect this, he said, gesturing to the wave of support. Neither did I, Helena replied. But I think people are ready to believe in something real again, later that week. Helena held a special press conference. She announced the creation of a new division in her company, the Carter Initiative. It would focus on veteran support, whistleblower protection, and ethical leadership training, and at the top of it, she named Daniel as Director of Integrity and Security. The crowd clapped, the cameras flashed, and Daniel stood there, not as a bodyguard, but as a leader, by choice, not by uniform. When the press asked him how it felt to return to the public eye, Daniel gave a rare answer. I didn't come back for the cameras, he said. I came back for the truth, and because one woman refused to let me disappear again, he glanced at Helena, who gave him the smallest nod, a silent thank you wrapped in a lifetime of understanding. Inside the office, changes came quickly. Employees were trained under Daniel's leadership, not just in security, but in character. He walked the halls not as a commander, but as a mentor. People respected him, not out of fear, but out of gratitude, and slowly, Helena's company began to shine again, not just as a tech giant, but as a force for good. But while the outside world praised them, Daniel still had one quiet fear. What if the peace didn't last? What if another shadow rose tomorrow? He'd fought too long to believe in fairy tales, but Lily, she gave him hope. Every night she slept peacefully in her new room, drawing, laughing, safe. And that meant something was working. One evening, Daniel found Helena on the rooftop balcony staring at the stars. She held 2 mugs of hot chocolate, one for her, one for him. Do you think we've done enough? She asked. Daniel sipped and nodded slowly. For now, he said. But we stay ready, Helena hesitated, then asked. If you were given the chance to clear your name fully, like military honors restored, everything wiped clean, would you take it? Daniel looked at the stars above them, then shook his head. No, he said, because if I erase the pain, I erase the lessons, and I wouldn't trade Lily's future for a clean file. The next morning, a surprise arrived, a formal letter from the Department of Defense, signed by the Secretary himself. It declared Daniel's dishonorable discharge officially overturned, his medals reinstated, his name cleared in the archives. The final line read, Mr. Daniel Carter is recognized for exceptional service, courage under fire, and commitment to truth above orders. Daniel didn't cry, but he stood in silence for a long time. Helena placed the letter in a silver frame and hung it next to the dragon drawing Lily made. Not as a trophy, but as a memory of what they survived. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began speaking at schools, youth programs, and veteran centers, not long speeches, just honest ones. He told the truth, answered questions, and never once pretended to be a hero. He just showed up, and for many, that was enough. One day, as he walked Lily to school, she asked, "Daddy, are you famous now?" He smiled and squeezed her hand. "Not really," he said, "just remembered," and that was all he ever wanted. In the office, people no longer whispered behind Helena's back. They saw her differently now, not just as a billionaire, but as someone who used her voice to lift others. The board apologized, investors returned, and her company's value skyrocketed. But more than the money, it was the respect that meant everything to her, because she didn't just save a soldier. She changed the story for him, for herself, and for everyone watching. 1 year later, everything had changed, and yet, in the ways that mattered most, everything had stayed the same. Daniel Carter still rose before sunrise, still brewed his coffee with the same quiet focus, still packed Lily's school lunch with little notes folded inside. But now he didn't live in fear. He lived in peace. Real peace, not the kind that comes from hiding, but the kind earned through fire, truth, and standing tall. The world no longer saw him as a shadow or a mistake. He wasn't forgotten anymore. He was honored, respected, and remembered, and yet, even with awards on the shelf and his name in national headlines, Daniel remained exactly who he had always been, a father first. Helena James had grown too. She was no longer the lonely billionaire walking into alleys to escape her stress. She had become something stronger, a leader with a cause. A woman unafraid to stand beside the broken and rebuild something better. Together, she and Daniel had created more than a security division. They had built a legacy. The Carter Initiative was now active in 14 cities, offering training, therapy, housing, and jobs for veterans, whistleblowers, and those recovering from trauma. It wasn't about politics or profit. It was about people. Real lives, real stories, real second chances. Lily now attended a top private school with a scholarship funded anonymously by Helena herself. But Lily never bragged. She still wore her superhero dad hoodie and carried her dragon notebooks. To her, the world was simple. Her dad was a warrior, and Helena was the smart lady who helped fix the world. Together they were her team. One bright spring afternoon, the three of them stood on stage at a community event. Helena gave a short speech about courage. Daniel handed out awards to local students, and Lily read a poem she had written herself. It was titled, "Brave People Are Quiet Too," and by the time she finished, even the mayor wiped a tear from his eye. After the event, they walked through the nearby park, the same one where Daniel used to sit alone watching Lily swing years ago. Now, Helena walked beside him, and Lily skipped ahead chasing butterflies. "It feels like a dream," Helena said softly. Daniel looked at the sunlight through the trees and nodded. "A real one," he replied. "Not the kind you wake up from." Helena paused, then turned to him. "You know, there's something I've been thinking about," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I've been offered a seat at the National Ethics Council. It's part of a reform group pushing for transparency in government contracts." Daniel looked at her seriously. "You should take it," he said. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "They'll dig into everything. My life, our connection, your past." Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then let them," he said. "We have nothing to hide anymore." That night, after Lily fell asleep surrounded by her stuffed animals and drawings, Helena and Daniel sat on the rooftop again. This time, no secrets hung in the air. Just quiet, comfort, and understanding. Helena looked out over the city, its lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in that alley that night?" she asked. Daniel took a breath, then smiled. "I don't need to wonder," he said, "because I was." Helena laughed softly. "Sometimes I think fate tripped me on purpose that night." Daniel chuckled. "Sometimes fate sends you through a storm to meet someone who knows how to build shelter." They sat in silence again, the wind brushing through their hair. Then Helena spoke again, quieter this time. Daniel, do you think this is it? This life, this version, is it finally enough? He didn't answer right away instead. He looked through the glass door at Lily sleeping on the couch with a dragon plush tucked under her chin. Then he turned back and said, "For the first time in my life, yes," the next morning. Helena accepted the council offer. Daniel stood beside her during the announcement. Not in a suit, not in armor, just as himself. The headlines the next day read, "From Shadows to Light, the team that changed the rules." But for Daniel, the only headline that mattered was a drawing Lily made that same night. It showed 3 stick figures standing on a hill, one tall, one in a dress, and one with pigtails above them in crayon. Were the words, "This is our family." Daniel framed the picture and placed it beside the one medal he kept out, not for war, but for peace. It wasn't gold or silver. It was a handmade badge from Lily's school that read, "Best Dad and Bravest Friend." And in that moment, Daniel Carter, once a soldier, once forgotten, once hunted, knew with full certainty. He had not just survived, he had built a life worth living. He had found home, not in a place, but in 2 people who saw him, stood by him, and believed in who he really was, not a ghost, not a weapon, but a man, a protector, a father, a friend, and finally, free.